First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rechak Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter. And this chapter goes into, it's one of those chapters that also jumps through time in terms of the visions that John is seeing. But the majority of it goes from the time of Israelites, mainly the southern kingdom, in captivity under the Romans. Okay, and and ultimately what ends up happening right as we're persecuted by the Romans, going into the time of 70 AD. All right, and into the time of coming here to America, to serve captivity, and then on throughout into the return of the Lord to fight for Israel. So let's get into it. This is Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven. So this is John sees, as he's looking and seeing this vision, right? He's seeing another great sign in heaven. And this time it was a woman, as it says, clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet. So it looked like she almost like she was wrapped, right, with this bright light, like the sun. She clothed herself with the sun and the moon under her feet. And the sun and the moon are symbolic for knowledge and wisdom. Okay, under her feet and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and the crown of 12 stars are representing the 12 tribes. So this woman is that John saw was an allegory for the nation of Israel, and the sun and the moon represented the knowledge and wisdom and understanding the Lord had given to us, which included the laws, statutes, and commandments. Okay, what did Moses say? Let's get that real quick in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse. We'll start at 5. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord Yahweh my God commanded me, that ye should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people, right? This great nation. So, and then also to prove the 12 stars are representing the 12 tribes. Let's go to the book of Genesis, chapter 37, verse 5. It says here, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more, because they were envious of him. And he said unto them, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. This is what a sheaf looks like. Sheaves. As it says, a bundle like this. Okay. That's an example. Once it loads. Okay, it won't load. Perfect. That's a sheaf right there. Okay. So he says here, we were binding sheaves. Where we at? In the field. So this is likely during harvest time. And my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. That means they bowed to it. And his brethren said unto him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet more for his dreams and for his words. So they were like, yo, who the hell does God think he is? Yeah, he's our brother, but you hear the inflammatory things he's saying? But they didn't realize these dreams were actually prophetic. Because what ended up happening after Joseph was sold into Egypt? They came and they paid obeisance to him. They fulfilled these dreams. Verse 9, and he dreamed yet another dream and told it his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. So who are the 11 stars? The rest of his brothers, which are patriarchs to the 12 tribes. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren, which are the 11 stars, because he would make 12, indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? So his father interpreted the dream in itself, and he's saying, Jacob told him, like, what do you, listen, what are you trying to say right now, man? Okay, now we know that Joseph ended up, becoming, when you go into Revelation, you'll see that there was a slight shift, right, in the actual um, matching of the 12 patriarchs to the tribes, because Dan is basically moved out the way, right? When you go into Revelation, Dan's name is not mentioned. Now, what ended up happening to Dan, we don't know, but the Lord is gonna, we'll find out when the Lord reveals it to us. But the 12 tribes now become where Joseph, of Joseph comes two tribes, right? Ephraim and Manasseh, which Jacob, when you read in Genesis, adopted as his sons in the stead of Joseph. Okay, so still those that dream that we just went into in Genesis 7 or 37 is showing you that that crown of the 12 stars here is symbolic for the 12 tribes, and this woman is representing the nation of Israel. Verse 2, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pained to be delivered. So this time period of the woman being with child and crying is, when you fast forward from the time of the Greeks and you go into the time of the Romans, you had a civil war going on, right, between the descendants of the Hasmonean dynasty. I think it was, you had Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, and they were brothers and they were going back and forth, blah blah blah. And then you had Pompey, who intervened, right, and eventually subjected us under Rome, and then eventually became a province under Rome, right, known as Judea. While we were under them, they did allow us some autonomy in governing ourselves after our laws, but we were subject onto them just like any other province, and we had procurators over us. You had Roman garrisons in our land, and then we had to pay tribute and tax onto them. So we were being oppressed ultimately by them, and that's why it says she, being the woman, with child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered, because at the same time that we were being oppressed, this child that the woman was bearing was Yahushai, okay, the Messiah, because he was to be born at that time. And so Israel was pained to be delivered ultimately from that hard like state that we were in. And that's what the birth of the child was for, to begin that deliverance of Israel from that hard bondage. And that's why the apostles, when Yahushua rose from the dead, what was one of the first things they asked him? Are you now going to restore the kingdom back to Israel? Okay. So verse 3, it says here, and there appeared another wonder in heaven. So John is seeing, okay, I see this woman, and what he's actually seeing is a woman that has the crown of the 12 stars, and she's pregnant. She's got a big stomach, and she's like in pain trying to get this baby out. And then he sees another thing, another sign in the heavens, and behold, a great red dragon. Now he sees an actual big giant red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and seven crowns upon his heads. Now at this time, like I mentioned, Pompey had subjected the time period of the vision he's seeing, not when he's receiving it, but the time period that the vision he's seeing is taking place. Pompey had already subjected us. We were subject to the Romans. So this great red dragon that he saw was symbolic of the Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire. Remember, you had Rome, which was a city. It was the heart, okay, and also one of the 7 heads. But at the time, it was the empire, the Roman Empire, okay, that consisted of the 7 heads and the 10 horns and the 7 crowns upon his heads. Okay, so that red dragon represented the empire, the Roman Empire. The 7 heads were nations that were combined in the formation of that empire. Because when you go into Rome's history, you had, obviously, Rome started off as a very small city. You have the whole myth of Romulus and Remus, right, about them being suckled by a she-wolf. And then eventually, they start to grow. They start to fight against the neighboring cities, the Samnite Wars, and so on and so forth. And then they get into the Punic Wars, and then they start to assert themselves as a dominant power in the region, right? After defeating, was it Carthage, and the Phoenicians and so on, and then they start to grow and take over. They had these wars taking over these nations round about them and assimilating them into the Roman Empire. And that's how you have the seven heads. And so the seven heads being the Greeks, right? They took and assimilated the Greeks into the Roman Empire. So now they were over them, and they would make them like provinces under them, which would be tributary onto them, and then they would set up consuls over them, which are like governors over these regions to make sure that they were doing what was in the best interest of Rome. So you had of the seven heads, Greece, Rome itself, which is another one of the seven heads. That's two of the seven heads. In the ancient world, it was known as Hispania, which today is called Spain. Let me see if I can look up here the Roman or the pagan Roman Empire map. Wondering if I can get one. Okay, this is not bad. That's not bad. It's not bad. So you can see all these regions here are, a part of it. Now I don't know what time exactly, time period in which they, this exact map is based. But the seven heads, you have Greece, which is in there, Rome, right, which they don't highlight it here, but they have Italia, and then Hispania, this region here, okay, and then Gallia, which is the French, okay, that was what it was called back then. And then you had Germania Major and Germania Minor, and then you had Britannia, okay, which is this part right here, or the UK or Britain. Those were the seven heads. And the 10 horns were really, smaller provinces within these regions. Majority of them, a lot of them they were known as the Germanic tribes, and they originated within a portion in Germania Major and Minor, but they eventually came to be extensions of the Roman Empire. Okay, and you have here, right, a few of the names in which they were known as historically. Today, they're known as the European Union, right, the EU, and you have your different, Italy and Luxembourg and Netherlands and so on. Back then, they had ancient names, and you had the Vandals, Alemanni, the Lombards, Heruli, the Anglo-Saxons, and you can look these up. You'll see they'll show up, right, and they eventually became extensions of the Roman Empire. The Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, Suebi, the Burgundians, and the Franks. Okay, so these were the 10 horns and the seven heads, and the seven. It says, and seven crowns upon his heads, which represent the dominion or rulership that Rome had as an empire. So here it says here, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. So remember, in the vision, John sees this pregnant woman, and she has like 12 stars. Like imagine like stars in the form of a halo on her head, like a crown. And then this giant red dragon that has seven heads does a little spinning, tail whip, and bam, it knocks off 3 stars from off her head, and they fall to the ground. They fall to the earth. It says, and the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered. So, imagine this dragon is looking at her, right? It got the tail wagging and shit, the seven heads. And he's seeing this pregnant woman and is waiting for her to give birth, as it says, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. This is why it's an allegory, because all these events and characters in this vision are symbolic for real life time periods and events that took place. So now the tail that drew the third part of the stars of heaven was when the Romans subjected us. The third part was referring to of the 12 tribes, the southern kingdom, which consisted of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. So it cast them to the earth, meaning that it subjected or subdued us under them. Because when you, at this point in time, it was mainly the southern kingdom that was in the land. The northern kingdom had come to the Americas. So it was mainly majority the southern kingdom that was in the land when Rome came and conquered us. Okay, and that was them casting the 3 tribes or the 3 stars to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And the actual event that that this was symbolizing was when Herod was inquiring at the birth of the child, which is Yahushai, to find out when he would be born so he can kill him, because Yahushai posed a threat to Herod, being that Yahushai was the king of the Jews, the true king, and Herod was an Edomite who was placed as king over us by the authority of the Romans. The Herodians were an extension of the Roman Empire as well, because they ruled through the power of the Roman Empire. Rome set them up over us, thanks to their forefather Antipater, the Idumean. Okay, so, and the account of this here is in the book of Matthew. Let's go to Matthew, the 2nd chapter, and we'll jump around a bit. But Matthew chapter 2, starting at verse 7, it says here, then Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. When you read the whole context of the chapter of Matthew 2, you'll understand, you had the wise men that came, they saw Yahushua's star, which was a chariot, and they knew that that was the time when the Messiah would be born. So when they came, they were looking for him, and Herod asked them, he inquired, hey, you're saying you saw his star appear. When did that happen? So he can know when Yahushua and where he is, if he's born, so that he can kill him. But obviously he was, lying. He was trying to act as though that wasn't his true intention. That was Revelation 12, the dragon standing before the woman, which was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born. So here, verse 8, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search diligently for the young child. And when ye have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. That is the real life playing out of this dragon that's like hovering over this woman, just looking, waiting for that baby to come forth to devour it. That was Herod diligently looking and waiting to hear news back so he can go and give the word to kill that baby. Now I'm going to jump down to verse 13 in the interest of time. And when they were departed, this is after the wise men had found Mary and Joseph, done their thing, and then they left, because the Lord warned them not to go back to Herod. It says here, and when they departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him, devour the child. And jumping down to verse 16, then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, because the wise men never came back. So he gave it some time, and he's like, oh. And the Lord put the spirit on him to wait and allow Joseph and Mary to escape. And then eventually when he's like, okay, it doesn't take that long. These men probably played me. He probably sent his spies out, go and find those wise men. They searched all Jerusalem, all Bethlehem. They didn't find them. And they realized, oh yeah, okay, so they played me. So he was very angry and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. So when he found out, okay, well, if he was born, let's say, or he would be born at this time, he would, at this point in time, he could not be any older than 2 years old. So, you know what? Just to be safe, kill all the babies 2 years old and under. This is some Amalek type, behavior. To say, you know what? We're looking for a target. We know the target is in building A, so blow up the whole city. Because you know what? At least for good measure, we know we might have some casualties, but we know we'll get the target. Showing you the Edomite tendencies of Herod. But going back to Revelation chapter 12, verse 5, and she brought forth a man-child, which is Yahushai, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And that goes back to the book of Psalms, because Yahushai that was his destiny, right? That the Lord had set up for him to rule all nations, right? To be the King of Kings. Psalms chapter 2, verse 8, ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance. This is referring to Yahushai. And the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession, and thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. So you're going to have the rule over them. So as it says here, he was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, hence king. And her child was caught up onto God and to his throne. And that was when, after Yahushua had completed his ministry, going back to Acts 1 and 9, and he was delivered, he was beamed up. He was taken up into a cloud, as the scriptures say. But we know what that cloud really was. Acts 1 and 9, and when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, his disciples, he was taken up. Today, the modern verbiage for it is he was beamed up by a beam from a chariot that elevated him into the chariot. That's the cloud. A cloud received him out of their sight. That was him being caught up onto God and to his throne. So yeah, and he would be at the right hand of the Father until the go ahead for him to come back down. Verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she, so now from verse 5, after Yahushua left, you had, a period of time, it was around 33 AD or so, sometime after that, you had the gospel spread. You had the Apostle Paul, right, be converted, and his missionary journeys and so on and so forth. And then eventually he was put to death, right? He was martyred. Peter was martyred. Some of the other apostles were put to death. And then you had the provocation, right, leading up to the Roman Jewish wars from 66 to 73, where Jake started to revolt against Rome, which triggered Nero to send in Vespasian, right, and the Roman armies, and Titus, which is Vespasian's son, to go and to quell the revolts. And they came in there. They started from that region up north, Syria, Antioch, coming down into Galilee, and then all the way down to Jerusalem. And then after they had destroyed the walls and the temple in Jerusalem, they made their way down to Masada. Let's see here. I believe that was the last stronghold that they took over. Stronghold of Masada. Yeah, Masada. And when you read the book of Josephus, it goes into a lot of details on that, as to how that actually, because he was actually in this war. He fought against the Romans in Galilee, and then Vespasian ended up sparing him and taking him as a servant, and that's how he was able to write all this information here. But anyway, they did that, and they ended up selling a lot of Israelites. They killed a lot of Israelites. They sold them as slaves. Some that tried to escape. Some committed suicide, right? Mercy killings before the Romans could get to them. But it was very bad. So that during that time of great persecution, the woman, as it says, which represents Israel, at this point is focusing on the southern kingdom, fled into the wilderness. Which the wilderness, it was the different areas they could flee to, but the predominant area where this wilderness is referring to is Africa, because that was like the closest area that we were most familiar with. You had a lot of Israelites that were familiar with the terrain of the region, right? You had a large community of Israelites in Alexandria, and into the interiors of Africa. And real quick, if I can actually find this, it's in the book called From Babylon to Timbuktu. Specifically, see if I can find page 84. There's a paragraph in there. Yep, look at that. Shit, I don't gotta say anymore. Look at that. Context. The book covers the migration of Black Hebrews from the Middle East to Africa and the subsequent development of advanced African civilizations. Let's take a look here, From Babylon to Timbuktu, page 84. Can we find that? 30, 72, 88, 84. Right here, page 84, this part right here. Right, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. And this is really history. It's really history that he's referring to here. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, right? So this was even before the siege, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. So if over 1 million fled, even just during the time of Pompey and Julius, how much more for during the time of the siege? And Yahushua had warned us to flee. Okay, so that was the woman fleeing into the wilderness, into Africa, where she hath a place prepared of God. Now, it's important to pay attention to the wording here, because it can sound very tricky if if you're not careful. The woman fled into the wilderness, that was Africa. Okay, now where she hath a place prepared of God is not Africa. Okay, the place that was prepared of God is America. Africa was a temporary holding spot, you could say. Okay, like a pit stop in terms of prophecy. And the place that was prepared is America. And it was prepared because the Lord had first set up Esau to come over here, conquer and subject the northern kingdom, set up, himself over here, i.e. America, and so on and so forth. And then in that state to come out and to come and get us from the coast of Africa and bring us. It wasn't just to America, but the bulk of the slaves were brought to America. That was a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there. That is America, Babylon, and the feeding is to nurture or to preserve. So even though we were in slavery and we were subject onto them and it was harsh, we were still actually preserved. We didn't go extinct. It wasn't a genocide. But the Lord did that on purpose. We would just be in a very low state, but we were still, we still actually had food and we still survived, even though it was horrible conditions. It says here 1,203 score days. If you've watched the video I did on Revelation 11, you'll see we mentioned and we went into the different ways in which this same time period is referred to, which is the time period of slavery. Okay, that 350-year period of slavery. 1,203 score days is 1,260 days. That adds up to 3.5 years. This 3.5 years is not literally 3.5 years, but in reference to 350 years, which is that duration of hardcore slavery that we were in under Esau, right? This the period of time the Lord had allotted for us to be in that condition. Okay, so this verse 6 covers a lot, like a large period of history from us fleeing around 70, 73, that period of time into the wilderness, and then dwelling in Africa for a good period of time before being, rounded up from there and brought here into America to serve captivity. Now, in after verse 6, the time period jumps from verse 7, 8, and verse 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. Let's see. So from verse 7 to verse 12, this time period is talking about post. Okay, far, far, far into the future after verse 6. Okay, verse 6 ends with us being brought here to America to serve captivity, to serve slavery. Verse 7 jumps ahead after the events that have transpired here in Babylon, the different prophecies that had to be fulfilled, the mark of the beast, the hour of temptation, leading up to the time of World War III, at the return of Yahushua. That's where verse 7 is picking up from. That's what John is seeing here. So he says here, and there was war in heaven. So now the vision has jumped to the future, right? What John is seeing, at least in terms of time period, is jumped into the future. And John is seeing this war in heaven. It says here, Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. Michael is the archangel Michael, and the angels that were with him were fighting against the dragon. The dragon represents Esau, his military might, which today is known as, NATO and their forces. And as it says, the dragon fought and his angels with their armies. Remember, in 2nd Ezra 13, it says that the nations, see if I can find it, who are engaged in World War III would leave off that war, and they would band together to fight against Yahushua when he comes back. See if I can find that here. And they're gonna lose horribly. Second Ezra, the 13th chapter. Oops. Well, actually, I could have just searched this. Slakia, subdue. Yeah. See if it shows up again. All right, let me take a look here. Because it mentions they're going to leave off their war one with another. Just give me 1 second while I look for it. There we go. Second Ezra chapter 13, verse 32. And the time shall be when these things shall come to pass, and the signs shall happen which I shewed thee before. And then shall my son be declared, which is when Yahushua is, made manifest, whom thou sawest as a, a man ascending. So going to show you in the Old Testament, Yahushua is also mentioned and prophesied of. Verse 33, and when all the people hear his voice, every man shall in their own land leave the battle they have one against another. That's in the midst of World War III. They're going to stop fighting each other. Ronald Reagan even gave a speech about this. You can look that up, Ronald Reagan alien speech. And an innumerable multitude shall be gathered together as thou sawest, willing to come and to overcome him by fighting. The devil and his angels. And then it goes on, to the angel breaking down some more of the vision. But going back to Revelation 12, that is going to be Esau, right? His military might, along with the rest of his armies, and go along with the rest of the armies of the world, fighting against the Lord and the angels, and they're going to lose, right? It says, and prevailed not, so they lost. Neither was their place found anymore in heaven, and that is their position of rulership is going to, if they lose to the Lord and the angels, that's it. That's like a country or a nation going to war and losing. They're about to be taken over. They've lost their power. That's the heaven, their seat of authority. And then also literally when they go up, when they have their planes and fighter jets and all that in the heavens, they're gonna be getting obliterated over there. A chariot might just fly into it and just completely break it up. That plane that is. Or just shoot it with a laser beam, or verse 9, it says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. And this great dragon, which is referring to Esau, the old serpent is still referring back to the garden, right? The serpent that deceived Eve. The spirit that was in that serpent is the same spirit that came back, okay, as the Edomites today. Just like the spirit that was in Adam and the sons of God later on came to be recognized as the Israelites. So that's why he's referred to here, the great dragon, which is Esau and his empire, and the old serpent called the devil, which is a deceiver, and Satan, the adversary. It's not talking about the spiritual demon Satan. These are all names attributed to Esau. And he was cast out, meaning that he was brought down. He was defeated and he was brought down, abased, and brought into captivity, right? Which deceiveth the whole world. And that's what they did, right? When they came up into power, Revelation 20 goes into that. They deceived the whole world, through shadow governments ruling behind the scenes and completely corrupting the mind of the world today. So people don't know what truth is, and they cover up the truth and they kill people who tell the truth. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. That was their place being found no more in heaven, right? Them losing their dominion and power. Verse 10, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God. See, because now Yahushua is here with the angels to take the kingdom, right? The saints shall take the kingdom. And the power of his anointed, for the accuser of our brethren, which is Esau, is cast down. He's finally been taken down. The last devil, the last heathen rulership has finally been taken down. This is what Daniel, it's in Daniel, the second chapter of the statue, right, of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we always mention, the head and the arms and so on, but don't forget about the feet, especially the part where the feet was broken up with a stone. Let's go down to Daniel 7 and verse. See if I can find it. Okay, let me look it up here. Stone. Yeah, there we go. This is Daniel 2:34, right? And I'll start at 33. His legs of iron and his feet part of iron and part of clay. That's referring to this last empire, the last leg of the Roman Empire, the second leg of the Roman Empire, the last heathen rulership. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut without hands, dealing with Yahushai's return. And Ezra even mentions that, right? That Yahushai, he graved onto himself a mountain, which is referring to his chariot, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and break them to pieces. That is also, that's a different rendition or wording of what we're reading of here in Revelation 12. Revelation 12 and 10, and 7, 8, 9, and 10 is playing out Daniel 2 and 34. So it says here, Revelation 2 and continuing in verse 10, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accuse them before our God day and night. And that's what they do. Okay, they first subject us, try to keep us in this dead state, and then they try to show forth to the Lord to say, hey, look, these are your so-called chosen people. Look at the state they're in. Look at the condition they're in. All right, they do that. And let's actually look into the word accused. But no matter what you do, you cannot triumph prophecy. All right, accused. Kategoros, an accuser, right? A name given to the devil by the rabbis. Look at that. All right, so not too much in there, but we know what it means anyway. Verse 11, and they overcame him, right? The elect overcame this devil, the dragon, the old serpent, and Satan, all referring to Esau, by the blood of the Lamb, which is Yahushai. And so how this part, which is referring to the elect, what was their role in overcoming him? Well, we're not the ones who are, shooting laser beams. Our role in overcoming him is not to take his mark or to worship the image, okay, to worship that idol, okay? So through the blood, Revelation 3 and 10, through the blood of Yahushua, we were kept, and we overcame him by not succumbing to him and not receiving his mark, okay? And by the word of their testimony, which is this truth, because it is the true gospel teaches you not to take the mark. It teaches you the name of the Lord. It teaches you what to do in these times. That'll help you overcome this beast, overcome this dragon. And they love not their lives unto the death, meaning that our lives are not, you are willing to lose your life if need be, to remain faithful to the Lord, even if it means death. Verse 12, therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. And that's who are in the heavens, right? The angels, Yahushai, the those that are already dead. Okay, it says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. Now, there's actually rejoicing in the heavens. When you read throughout the book of Revelation, it tells you that. The angels were rejoicing, saying that now is come salvation, now is come the glory of Yahushai, because this time period is the fulfillment of the mysterious plan of God. So the angels and those in the heavens are rejoicing at that. But at the same time, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. Why? Because even though it's the end and the plan is coming and the seventh angel is sounded, those that are on the earth have to actually live it out. And it's going to be a time of great destruction and chaos. So it's going to feel, chaotic and destructive for those that are actually on the earth. as it says, and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Okay, so the inhabitants of the earth have to go through this great wrath, which is the time of Jacob's trouble as well, because the Lord is going to use this devil. Remember, in his push, in his wrath to try and quickly accomplish what he's trying to do, it's gonna be the intensifying of Jacob's trouble. The hour of martial law, the mark of the beast, the hour of temptation. That's this devil pushing with great wrath to try and accomplish his agenda because he sees his time is short. Verse 13. So now it jumps back in time. Okay, continuing the narrative from verse verse 6, right? When it talks about the woman fleeing. So continuing in verse 13, this part of the vision is continuing from when the woman flees into Africa, right? And when the dragon saw that he was cast onto the earth, or actually, Salakia, let me say, it continues the time period, right? Going back to when we were subject to the Romans. But verse 13 in particular is continuing the part of Herod, right? And when what we read in Matthew, the 2nd chapter, of what Herod actually did. Because remember, the dragon being the Roman Empire, Herod was an extension of that, the Herodians. So what the reaction that the dragon had, or the reaction Herod had when he found out that the wise men had played him, that's verse 13. And when the dragon saw that he was cast onto the earth, right, in Matthew 2, let me see how it's worded. I forgot what it said. Verse 16. Right, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, right? That's how it's worded here. So when the dragon saw that he was cast onto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. Okay, and also in the actual vision, imagine a woman that is actually giving birth. Okay, let's see what it's. Yeah, it says when the dragon realized that he had been thrown down to the earth, cast to the earth, he had been hurled to the earth. Yep. It says here, he persecuted the woman, which is Israel, which brought forth the man-child. Okay, now, on the note of what Herod did, right, we read that in Matthew, the 2nd chapter. But when you get past that point, the real persecution that came from the dragon, which is the Roman Empire, is the events that transpired after that. Right, because eventually Herod died. Right, he killed the children. He ended up dying. He ended up, leaving his sons, ruled in his stead. But in period of time, we led up to 66 to 70. Right, the real persecution from the Romans. Right, through the Roman Jewish wars. Okay, and that's really the main fulfillment of this persecution. Because yes, Herod, like I said, he did what he did, but that wasn't really that kind of persecution that leads up to verse 14. Okay. So it says here in verse 14, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. The 2 wings, or the wings of a great eagle, are not literal, but remember, the woman represents the nation of Israel. So the wings here is symbolic for the ability to escape swiftly. Right. And so with that ability, right, the Lord gave us that she might fly into the wilderness. That's to escape into the interiors of Africa. Now, once again, you see how there's always a comma after this, right? Because this verse 14 is the same point in verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, right? Comma, where she hath a place prepared of God. So jumping down to verse 14, she might fly into the wilderness is the same thing, into her place. Her place is the place that she had prepared of God, which is America. So these are periods of time. She flees into the wilderness, right? That's Israel, the southern kingdom fleeing, the ones that could escape into the interiors of Africa. Into her place, this is America, right? This is where, when in history, we were taken from, Africa and brought here as slaves to America, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time. Once again, go back and watch Revelation 11, right? I went into that, the time, times, and half a time, and how that lines up with 350 years. So she is nourished or preserved here in captivity, because we were slaves, but we were still taken care of to the degree that we would still live, okay, for a period of 350 years. A time here represents 100 years. Times is double that. So time 100 years times is 200 years, and is English in math, it's addition. Okay, when you and things in math, it's addition. Okay, so it's 100 and or plus 200. Okay, so if you say, for example, I have one bottle, or I have one apple and two oranges, how many fruits do I have in total? 3, right? But if you say, give me an apple or an orange, how many fruits are you going to have in the end? 1, right? Because you're one or the other. But if you say, give me an apple and an orange, how many fruits are you going to have? 2. So and is addition. So here, time is 100 and times, so 100 plus 200 and plus half a time. Well, of 100, if time is 100, what's half of 100? 50. So you have here 100 plus 200 plus 50. That's 350. And that is how long we were that was the allotted time for us to be in that state, because we're still in captivity, but for that period of 350 years, there was a certain condition we were in. Okay, which we have more freedom now than we did then. So that was that 350-year period from the face of the serpent. The serpent is Esau, because it was in the land of America, on Esau's plantations, right, where we were nourished, or where we were, in captivity for this duration of time. Verse 15, and the serpent, now once again it goes back to the time of the Romans coming against us. Okay, so verse 14, it gives you the rundown of what happens. The woman flees, she escapes for a period of time into Africa, then she's brought into captivity in America. Then it goes back in verse 15 to the cause, why we fled. It says here, and the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman. The serpent here is the same as the dragon. Okay, it's Esau, but here in time it was the Romans. So when the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood, that water or that flood represented the Roman armies. And let's get a quick precept to show that flood is not always talking about literal water, right? This is Psalms 18:4. The sorrows of death compassed me, and the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. So was David saying that ungodly men were water? No. Were ungodly men breaking a dam somewhere to cause a flood? No. It's saying the overflowing of ungodly men. So likewise here in verse 16, Slakia verse 15, the cast out of his mouth water as a flood is referring to the Roman armies. After the woman, so they came after us, Israel, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. So this is also in Daniel, the 9th chapter, right? With the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. I believe that's in Daniel. Daniel 9 in the last verse. We do not want to do that. And it mentions here, this is it, right? And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. This is the Romans, and that 1 week is the period of 66 to 73. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. That was the period of 70 AD. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay, so I'm really just skimming through this, but to make the point, you can go and watch the... Oh, shoot, even better. Let me jump up a verse. But anyway, you can go and watch the breakdown on Daniel 9 to get a more in-depth breakdown of this. But the point here is, this was the Roman armies coming there against us in our land, in Jerusalem, to destroy Israel and to destroy the temple. But in the 26th verse, it uses great language, which I like. It says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people, because Yahushua came and he died, but it was really for the sins of Israel. And the people of the prince, which is referring to the Romans, shall come, or that shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. Now, when you go into the history of the Roman siege of Jerusalem, was there an actual flood? Did it actually rain and flood the place? No. So what does it mean the end thereof shall be with a flood? That's referring to the armies flooding in or over flooding us, like King David said in Psalms 18. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. So going back to Revelation chapter 12, that is here, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood, that through their armies, they would be able to, to get us. And they did get a portion of Israel, but not everybody. Verse 16, and the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth. And what it means by the earth helped the woman, meaning that it worked to our advantage, because we were more used to the terrain of of Africa, right? It was much more habitable for us than for them, because the Romans had conquered, like, if where was this that I pulled up, the pagan Roman Empire map, and see here you can see, I guess we can just use this one here. So you can see here, yes, they had conquered certain areas here in Africa, right? Mauritania and the Cyrene, and this parts of Egypt here, but they hadn't gone deep into the interiors of Africa. And if we were fleeing their persecution, we settled into different areas, but we also went deep into Africa. Okay, so we had the advantage because they weren't accustomed to that kind of terrain, and that was the advantage that helped the woman over the floods. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of out of his mouth. Okay, so the swallowing up the flood, it's like when it actually rains, or when there's actual flood, eventually it sinks down into the earth, right? And then the water subsides, grab back into the ground. So here, the swallowing up of the flood was the earth preventing, right, the Roman armies from pursuing too far after Israel into the interiors of Africa, because those soldiers were not accustomed to dealing with that terrain and the things that came with it. Okay, and that wasn't the kind of warfare they were trained for, to be chasing you all the way, chasing you deep into those interiors. No. Okay, and the Lord set it up that way because Israel wasn't meant to be destroyed completely by the Romans. Verse 17, and the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yahushua HaMashiach. Now, this here, it once again jumps to the present time, because we're reading about what the dragon did when they came against Israel back during the time of 66 to 73, 74 AD. But after that, it jumps into the future, and in this time, right, in verse 17, in this time, the same dragon, right, just brought back again. Instead of being called the ancient Roman Empire, they're now known as the new power structure headed by America, which is NATO and the EU. Okay, and it's also synonymous with the beast. Now, why were they wroth with the woman, and the woman representing Israel here? It says, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yahushua HaMashiach, because that remnant are going to be the ones that are likened onto the threat they issue out, right? In Revelation 13, it says, all that will not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Because those that keep the commandments of God are going to resist the mark of the beast. They're going to resist the temptation, the hour of temptation, and they're going to be deemed as enemies, public enemies of this dragon. Okay, and 2nd Ezra 16 also goes into that, an insurrection upon those that fear the Lord. But we know that in this time they're going to be defended, right? Isaiah 59 and 19, the Lord is going to defend, and through what? The blood of the Lamb, they're going to gain the victory over the beast. Yeah, and that brings us to the end of the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter. Just make sure about that. All right, cool. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.